Wario is a weird guy, much weirder than Mario. So then it only makes sense that the bosses in his platformer series of games are even weirder and wackier than in Mario's, right? Well, Nintendo must have agreed with that assessment, cause hoo boy, Wario has faced some absolutely ridiculous creatures, beings and dare I say even humans over the course of his 8 games, Wario World and Master of Disguise included. But funnily enough, it did not actually start that way. The very first boss Wario ever faced as a video game protagonist, back when Wario Land still had the Super Mario Land subtitle in the hopes that would help it sell, was the spiked Koopa of Rice Beach, who is clearly meant to tie into Bowser's forces despite not being a part of this game at all. It is also interesting to note that while the English name of the enemy calls it a Koopa, its Japanese name, Togeburosu, references both Spinies and Hammer Bros, making clear that the connection to the Koopa Troop is intentional, but it's not necessarily meant to look like a Koopa Troopa. This is the only boss in the entire Wario Land series that has ties back to the Mario world. Everything else is completely original, which makes it feel a lot more like this was meant to kinda keep up appearances that Wario Land was similar to Mario Land, before the gloves went off and it truly became its own series. That doesn't mean the first game goes buck wild with the rest of the bosses though. Next is a penguin, a familiar species from Mario games, even if they have never looked as wicked as this, as well as a minotaur, which is certainly unique, but not necessarily original of course. It wouldn't be until the 4th boss of Wario Land 1 that we would get a type of boss Wario would face off against much more often, the Devil's Head. Floating heads and surreal monstrosities are Wario's bread and butter going forward, and this is the very first time he ever faced one of these. If you're thinking this face doesn't look too demon-like though, you are correct, as it's actually based on a Hanya mask rather than the demons or devils as we often see them portrayed. These masks originate from Japanese theater and represent jealous female demons, so it all checks out in the end, but it can be hard to notice for us in the West. Case in point, the Italian guide for the game, which likens this boss to the character Dalsim from Street Fighter. You know, an IP Nintendo doesn't even own. The next boss is the giant bird Bobo, who is also unique in that this is actually the only boss in the entire Wario Land series, not counting Captain Syrup, to make a reappearance. Although he is significantly smaller, Bobo returns in the second Wario Land with a slightly different moveset. The reason for this is that Bobo is the guard of the SS Teacup, Captain Syrup's ship, and since the ship reappears, so does its protector Bobo. Then again, Penguin is also a member of Syrup's pirate crew, yet it never returns, so it's still noteworthy. The next boss of the first Wario Land is the creatively named Ghost, who depicts Wario's worst nightmare, a spectral being that eats coins. It's not the most exciting one. That can absolutely not be said about the final boss of the first Wario Land though. Narratively, I've always found this a very interesting boss to end the game on. And I know that sounds ridiculous to say about a platformer with barely any dialogue, but there's one key detail about the genie that we do know, and that is the one that makes the difference. So, prior to Wario Land, the Mario series was quite simple. With your hero, Mario, sometimes Luigi, and you had your villain, which was Bowser 9 times out of 10, and sometimes Ward or Tatanga. All 3 were clear villains without much redemption or grey morality about them, and that's fine, that works. But the genie in Wario Land is different. This genie is not a villain at all. He's not an antagonist, he's not evil, he doesn't have a wicked plan. He's a perfectly neutral character, but he is bound to follow the wishes of whoever rubs his lamp. And then is Captain Syrup, who summons him to fight and defeat Wario, which obviously doesn't succeed. It's an interesting choice, I think, to end Wario's first ever game without a fight against its main antagonist, and instead against a neutral force that is under control of the antagonist instead. Sure, that is hardly novel nowadays, that goes without saying, but at the time, the Mario series had never done anything like this. Every final boss up until this point had been the main antagonist of the game. Wario Land 1 is the first that goes outside of that box. That changes in the second game, Wario Land 2, where Captain Syrup is not just the final boss, she's also fought regularly throughout the game in all kinds of different machines. For a Wario Land game, I'd say this is the title with the least interesting set of bosses. Many are just large animals, even if the design of them still feels unmistakably Wario-esque. Take the giant bee for example, which for some reason has a bird-like beak. A wonderful exception is Dunk, an anthropomorphic bunny who is also a proficient basketball player. Wario and Dunk face off in what is essentially a basketball game, where they can each turn the other into a ball and have to throw it through the basket 3 times to win. It's a super creative and fun boss fight, one that really sticks out from the rest of the game, which, again, is on the lower end of the spectrum as far as wacky bosses in the Wario Land series goes. Wario Land for Virtual Boy is strong competition though. This game actually released prior to Wario Land II, and so can be considered the actual second Wario Land game, even if Nintendo apparently doesn't view it that way. This game has by far the smallest roster of bosses, only 4, and 3 of them are largely unremarkable. The absolute highlight of the game is the spiritual successor to the Devil's Head, now promoted to being the final boss in the form of Demon Head. I can't tell you much about this character, there is basically nothing known about it, the guides and manual don't even acknowledge its existence, but it's without a doubt the most messed up sprite the larger Mario franchise had seen up to this point. Maybe it's the limited color scheme of the Virtual Boy that makes this demon look even more completely insane, but something about it just looks unhinged. But apparently it would awaken something in the team behind these games. Going forward, more Wario games than not would feature bosses with similar grotesque designs, sometimes even more than one. Wario Land III is one of them, but most of all, it is the game that truly starts to nail the unique Wario look and feel of bosses and other enemies. The majority of them now feel like something you could never see in a Mario game, and most have interesting, unique twists to them. There is still a large squid and a large spider, so it's not all super creative, but even the simpler bosses try to shake things up. Like Dollboy, the first boss, a large Daruma doll, or Wolfen boss, a kitsune wearing a robe who looks like he could be the protagonist of a cult classic indie game. The true star of the show is of course Rudy the Clown, as he has come to be known in the West thanks to Dr. Mario 64, although in Japan and in Wario Land 3 itself, he's simply referred to as a hidden figure, an ominous title befitting of such a twisted design. Obviously, it helps that clowns are better known for their role in horror nowadays than their humorous quips, but Rudy too has a design Mario's clown-based bosses don't come close to hitting. The dark colors, the enormous size, the monstrous face and green skin. It's clear this is a monster, not just a boss or an enemy. Rudy is the god of his world, the world inside the music box the game revolves around, and that is exactly what he feels like. Before we move on to Wario Land 4, we have to quickly acknowledge the return of Wario Land 2's best boss. Shoot is another rabbit boss with a sports theme, and this time the game in question is soccer or football. Just like with Dunk, the goal is to score 3 points by turning the other into a ball and then shooting it at the goal, where Tortoise is serving as a goalkeeper. If Wario is the striker, the Tortoise may save his efforts on goal, but if shoots, the Tortoise will just let it pass through for a goal every time. I smell match fixing. Wario Land 4 may not have the same number of bosses as the past games in the main series, but the simple fact this is now a GBA game means that, oh man, the bosses look better than they ever have. Well, actually most of them are quite grotesque and not too great to look at, but design-wise it's definitely elevated the styling of the game to a new level. The first boss, Spoiled Rotten, starts out looking like a sleepy eggplant-like creature, but quickly turns into a savage-like beast after a few hits and starts to resemble the monstrous look we've come to know from the Wario series at this point. Bosses with this "oh now I'm really pissed" mechanic are hardly novel in the larger Mario series, but not often has the angry face look this unhinged. But I guess I keep saying that about every Wario boss at this point, so you get the gist. Spoiled Rotten is followed up by Cractus, a large man-eating plant, who is not actually too creatively designed, but what is interesting is that Cractus is the only element of the Wario Land series to cross over into the WarioWare series, as it appears in WarioWare Move It and Cat and Anna stage. This is the result of Ko Takeuchi, designer of Cractus, also being the character designer for Move It. The next bosses are another masterpiece of creativity. First is Cuckoo Condor, a fight that starts out as a battle against a large cuckoo clock, but after enough damage it falls apart to reveal the large ugly condor hidden inside. The next is Air Rodent, a ghostly mouse or rat that is blowing up a large balloon of a teddy bear. Wario has to knock into the balloon to expose the boss and can then use pins to deflate it. In practice, I must say this boss battle isn't as fun and engaging as I would have liked it, but the idea behind it is super creative and exactly that kind of wackiness that makes the Wario Land series so unique. For the last 2 bosses, the monstrous side of the series shows its literally ugly face again. Catbat is just messed up, and while the final boss, the Golden Diva, initially doesn't look too monstrous, that quickly changes as the battle progresses, another thing this game likes to do much, as you might have noticed. It never hits the absolute horrors that the Demon Head and Rudy the Clown are, but this still definitely qualifies as weird as hell, right? It should be pointed out though that while the design of the Golden Diva's face is again based on a theatrical mask from Japan, this one does not have demonic origins. The Yotoko, as this is called, is more comical in nature, which still fits Wario like a glove, of course. Before we head to the currently latest Wario Land game, Shake It, let's make a little pit stop at the two spin-offs, I guess you could say, Wario World and Wario Master of Disguise. Wario World's graphical style is one of the strangest of all games in the larger Mario franchise, and that can definitely be seen in the design of its bosses as well. This is actually the Wario game with the most bosses, so I won't tackle every single one and instead focus on the absolute highlights. Like the absolute twisted designs of some of the more human-like bosses in this game. First there is Brawl Doll, which is technically a marionette doll, not a human, but that doesn't make it any less eerie, it only adds to the insanity. It is absolutely hilarious to see Wario just pick up this depiction of a baby and just smack it on the floor WWE style. It's proper Mario would never stuff. Clown Around is another clown-like boss, and while certainly not as horror-esque as Rudy, this guy definitely qualifies as weird, complete with the fact that he can remove his own heads. Yes, heads, multiple. I can already clearly see how some kids playing this game would be absolutely terrified of some of these bosses, but then we haven't even hit the worst one yet. That title for me goes to Winner Winster. A somewhat realistic, huge face with Medusa-like hair that instead uses cold air to damage Wario. I will say though, the mean MC does give Winner Winster a run for its money. This is some kind of tall green human thing that has a boss fight involving a shovel cup-like mechanic, which is certainly creative. This guy too has something very uncanny about him, it just feels off, it feels wrong somehow. And while many Wario games have had bosses and enemies like that, the fact it's now all in 3D and with that early GameCube style, which always felt a little offbeat, it just amplifies the uncanniness of it all. Master of Disguise obviously doesn't have to deal with that, but due to being on the DS, expectations are high for more monstrosities that rival what we saw in Wario Land 4. So does it deliver? Nah, partly. The first two fights are against Count Cannoli, so that's nothing too strange, and the third is a Sphinx, which may be stylized in that classic Wario style, but it's still not super creative. But then the game gets rolling. Carpaccio, one of the characters in this game and a thievery rival of Wario, may be a human in his regular appearance, but he can transform into whatever the hell this is. Why is it winking and drooling? I don't like this at all. Which means it scores amazing on the Wario scale, but still. This fight is then followed up by Pooba the Pharaoh, and whereas his fellow Egyptian icon, the Sphinx, may have been a bit underwhelming, this guy is crazy like you would expect. Unlike all other bosses in this game, Pooba actually has a backstory that explains how, despite his immense wealth, he wanted one wish more than anything. To make this happen, he made a deal with a demon known as Tiramisu, but the demon betrayed him. He completed his side of the deal though, which was to starve his underlings, but he never got his wish, and instead the demon took all his wealth and buried Pooba in his pyramid underneath the sand. It's a weirdly detailed backstory in a game, hell a series, that usually doesn't care for stuff like that. Oh, and in battle, his weakness is his underwear, which eventually comes off to reveal what looks like a bush of pubic hair. I've been saying Mario would never. The next boss, Kabloom, looks kind enough and appears to be a heavy outlier in a streak of grotesque and bizarre masters, but don't let its appearance fool you. According to its in-game description, it reeks of garlic and animal waste, and believe it or not, symbolizes death. Sure, why not? The game then continues with this messed up face known as Barfatronic Lava Chomper, which is then followed up by Stuffy the 64th, the ruler of the Dolphin Kingdom. Not only is the entire idea behind that hilarious, this might also just be the only dolphin I've ever seen who cannot breathe above water, and that's something that's actually a big factor in this boss battle too. To close off the game, we fight against this aforementioned Tiramisu, who may or may not be the same person as Tiramisu, the woman Wario has been helping this entire time. And man, as far as eldritch horror figures goes, this one is up there. What the hell even is this? Some sort of demonic dimension where a blue-masked Tiramisu is all there still appears to be? This face is then replaced by a smiling variant, which is arguably even more uncanny, before then culminating in a fight against a demonic-like head, which I will say may not be as twisted as the demon from Virtual Boy, but is definitely bizarre enough to fit the established expectations of the Wario series, even if this game technically isn't a Wario Land title. Shake It for Wii is, however, even if it isn't numbered, and I gotta say, for how amazing this game looks, the boss designs aren't peak Wario Land. The characters look great, the levels look great, but the bosses, they're a bit of a letdown. The first boss, Roll and Rattle, is so simple in design and mechanics it could be a Mario boss, which is not a compliment. And while the rest of the designs are slightly better, I don't think they can run with the rest of the series. Hot Roderick, the next boss, is probably the best one, I'd say. A sentient car is not something we fight every day, and this high-paced fight really suits the animation style of the game perfectly, even if the mechanics are a little undercooked as well. Then we have Chortlebot, a robot clown head that can't even remotely run with the weird clowns and separated heads of the past, and Bloomsday, another giant plant, who's the complete opposite of Hot Roderick. This battle feels very slow, very unexciting, which obviously isn't helped by the fact the boss's design is just a large potted plant, not exactly the most novel idea. Large Fry is better, he's cool, his design is pretty fun, but just like Bloomsday, his battle is too slow paced to really feel exciting and fun. And for the last boss in the Wario series so far, we have a surprising enemy in how unsurprising it is. For only the second game in the series, the final boss is the main antagonist of the game. In 1998, Wario Land II, it was Captain Syrup, and in Shake It, it is the Shake King. No grand transformations, no grotesque monster designs, just the shaking in a battle that is really difficult, partly due to motion controls, partly due to just sheer difficulty, but unfortunately, it is not the big epic set piece a game with such a gorgeous art style deserved. There are 3 phases to this fight, but none of them really play into the style of the game, like for example Hot Roderick did, nor do they do anything novel, unlike plenty of other bosses in the series, as we've seen so many times before in this video. So yeah, let's all come together and hope it won't be too long before this fight is no longer the last boss of the Wario Land series. We're closing in on 20 years since Shake It released, so to say it's about that time is an understatement. And maybe a potential new game can introduce a new slew of bizarre, wacky and monstrous bosses for Wario to fight. Which of these bosses is your favorite? And what are your experiences with the Wario Land series? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on all my future Mario and Wario content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.